Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Happy Thursday, best day of the week. Coming up, we are going to talk to Jason Riley from the Wall Street Journal, but we're going to talk about Thomas Sowell. It was his 90th birthday the other day, and there's a new documentary coming out soon about him. So we're just going to celebrate that amazing man. And then coming up, we're going to talk about the history of democracy with another guest coming up here in just a minute. But I want to start here. 2 days ago, I think, we talked to Professor Azarad from Hillsdale College. And he said something there that stuck with me the last 2 days, and I want to go over it again. I think it's important. So we were talking about true equality, what that really means or meant in America, as opposed to the equality of outcome that the woke are pushing today. They call it equity. Equity and equality are not the same thing to the woke. But if we live in a country with equality of opportunity, and if we are people who have the ability to reason, then there also has to be responsibility that comes along with that. So I asked him what our responsibilities are in a free country. Here's what he said.
Well, I mean, I would think of it in terms of concentric circles, that you have an individual who is part of a family, who is part of a community, who is part of a country, who belongs to the human race. And the farther out you go, the fewer responsibilities you have. So you have greater responsibilities to your family than you do to your community, and in a sense, greater responsibilities to help, for example, the poor in your community than you do the poor in America, than you do the poor in Africa.
And that's so good. So I just want to stop on that for a second so we can all visualize that. We can even draw it out, have a little handy-dandy diagram like I've drawn. So individuals in the middle, family, community, country, human race. Further out you are from the center, the less responsibility you have. Now, of course, he made the point that this doesn't mean you have no responsibility or you hate the human race the further you get away. That's not it at all. It's just more responsibility, individual, and less as you go out. Now, I'd wonder, and this is for a different day, but I wonder if there's like a Christian, like, concentric circles that like overlay this or are next to it, or something where if you're a Christian, you're supposed to consider your fellow Christians as brothers, even more so than even your actual blood if they're not Christians. So, and there's a lot of difficult ramifications to consider there if you believe that to be true. So maybe a Christian in Africa may be more of your, at least, community than someone who's actually in your geographic neighborhood. So there's an asterisk to that with Christianity, which I think is interesting. We're going to table that for now, right? It's going to, in this simplified world, individual, family, community, country, human race. Here's what he said next.
Think of it today, the governing logic of our elites is a very odd thing where we're responsible for the whole of humanity, which allows us to completely ignore those around us. So if you go to the, very nice coastal cities where the wealthy, credentialed, successful people live, they're filled with homelessness, with mental illness, with broken families. But don't worry about it. Our elites are good people because they support AIDS programs in Malawi.
So postmodern world, just like everything, it's backwards. So a progressive would argue that your first responsibility, at least with their rhetoric, is the human race. This is where you hear I'm a global citizen, I'm a world citizen. And then, and I'm being super cynical here, but just for the point, I'm a global citizen, do nothing about AIDS research or helping kids in Africa or whatever. Then hate so they work backwards. They start out here, work backwards. I'm a world citizen, and then hate their country, ignore their community, as he talked about there with homelessness and all the rest, have broken families themselves, and then lead miserable individual lives. And that, Marx and Rousseau, who we've talked about a lot the last 2 weeks, those guys were perfect examples of this. They were broken, cruel, narcissistic, nearly psychopaths. How many of Rousseau's contemporaries called him a monster? and not even like a friendly monster in Monsters, Inc. or something. One of his guys, it was Hume or someone, called him an odious monster. Just to be very clear that he's not even a friendly monster, he's an odious monster. These people, Marx and Rousseau, did not work on themselves. They did not spend much time at all on the smallest concentric circle here. Rousseau abandoned all 5 of his children, left them for dead. Was terrible to other people. And therefore, because he didn't want to work on himself, therefore elevated the state, 3 rungs out, 3 concentric circles out, elevated the state, the patriae, in the name of the human race, the furthest circle out. Azarad touched on this as well.
Well, what are you going to put first? You can't put humanity first. I mean, that really is, it's not possible to do that. It's too vast, too amorphous. So what you end up doing is you put yourself first.
Yes.
You end up leading a rather solipsistic, self-absorbed existence that is, repackaged with this highfalutin language about I'm here to make the world a better place, but the world is too big. You can't grasp it. And so you end up turning back upon yourself and being rather self-absorbed. And this is a lot of what we see. These people who claim to be global citizens, to think about humanity and not their countries. Not all of them, but many of them I've found tend to be quite self-absorbed.
You say you're putting humanity first, but you're actually putting yourself first, which Rousseau did. He claimed, therefore, because he abandoned his kids, that we should have all kids educated by the government. But what he was really doing was just justifying the abandoning of all 5 of his kids. So it was selfishness in the name of loving humanity. Foucault was another person we did a brief history on. He was, Foucault is the most cited philosopher, academic today, by far. Like Foucault is, what do you say, it was Darwin and Einstein combined. Foucault has more citations in academic research today, right? And he was a deviant beyond all measure, right? And like sadomasochist, fell in love with a transvestite, like off the charts. And it makes you wonder how many of the atrocities that have been committed by people in the last 150 years can be traced back to philosophers who really needed to spend more time changing their own lives instead of trying to change the world. Which leads to my absolute favorite Jordan Peterson clip. After hours of deliberation, this is my all-time favorite Jordan Peterson clip by far, and it only has 6,000 views. How could that possibly be? So we're going to view it next. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, this is my all-time favorite Jordan Peterson clip. It only has 6,000 views. I don't know how that could possibly be, but let's make sure we are aware of it. So again, quick background. Professor Azarad made the point, concentric circles, personal responsibility, that's in the beginning, in the middle, and then it goes you, family, community, country, world, human race, and your responsibility decreases the further away you get from the center. You have to work on yourself first. Progressives work from the outside in, and it doesn't go well. So this is a perfect example of this. So Jordan Peterson, he's in Australia, and this woman is asking this question, and she's bringing up these huge societal issues. The climate catastrophe, she calls it, right? Global warming, all this other big things. And she's criticizing Peterson because she says he has too simplistic answers for complex questions. She's like, listen, you've too much talk, Jordan Peterson, about personal responsibility over things that are impossible for individuals to have responsibility over, right? So from her perspective, it's like, Jordan Peterson keeps going on and on about personal responsibility, but we have a climate catastrophe on our hands, right? So this is a huge issue that I can't have any effect over as a single person. So you can see how she's so focused on the outer circle, right? She's thinking about the human race, or in this case, the planet, which I guess is even like the next circle maybe. But she's thinking about this huge issue and dismisses even the concept of that inner circle of personal responsibility. I think we have a little bit of her question here.
things that are well out of our control. So I want to know, what is your answer to young people for some of the really big problems facing humanity, like the climate catastrophe, like economic crisis, like the precarious job market? Because I just don't, you talk all this much about individual responsibility. Most of us are never going to be able to afford to have all of these assets to have responsibility over. So what is your advice beyond banal comments like clean your room?
Oh, I love it. Things out of our control, right? I love this idea that at the end there that she says she doesn't have enough things. I don't have the resources even to have enough things to be in control over. I don't have anything to be responsible over. That's what she says. So of course you have things that you are responsible over. Of course you are, starting with yourself. So she's denying even the existence of that inner circle of personal responsibility. Amazing. And Jordan Peterson's first answer is, those things you mentioned are not as far out of your control as you think. Actually, his first answer is essentially, it's hard to answer a question, or it's hard to answer an insult politely, calling everything I say banal. But anyway, she rewords it not much better, and then Jordan Peterson finally gets after it here.
Do you think you're worse off than your grandparents?
I think that
Jordan, once again, we're not going to cross-examine our questioners. So try answering the question about collective responsibility on climate change, for example. Pick one part of that, because the argument, I think, is that individual responsibility does not change the climate, does not fix the problem that needs global collective responsibility. So I think that's the core of the question. Do you have a theory about that?
Well, fundamentally, I'm a psychologist, and my experience has been that people can do a tremendous amount of good for themselves and for the people who are immediately around them by looking to their own inadequacies and their own flaws and the things that they're not doing in their lives and starting to build themselves up as more powerful individuals. And if they're capable of doing that, and then they're capable of expanding their career. And if they're capable of expanding their career and their competence, then they're capable of taking their place in the community as effective leaders. And then they're capable of making wise decisions instead of unwise decisions when it comes to making collective political decisions. I'm not suggesting in the least, and have never suggested, that there's no domain for social action. I'm suggesting that people who don't have their own houses in order should be very careful before they go about reorganizing the world, which happens in many ways.
Can I just...
Oh, I love her smug, who are you? Where your reaction to that is, oh, no, nope. Are you kidding me? So again, she's talking about these big issues facing the human race, and Jordan Peterson brings it back to that first circle. He says, oh, you first need to do good for yourself, and then the people immediately around you. Improve yourself, work on your own flaws, the things you have responsibility over you, then expand your career, and then you can take a place in the community as an effective leader, and then you can make wise decisions about collective political decisions. He's just speaking of the concentric circles that Professor Azarad was a minute ago. Now, here's the best part of the clip. First of all, watch her head shaking again at the end. But this is my favorite Jordan Peterson moment ever. Here it is.
If a young person believes that the climate, the global warming problem on the climate is something that needs to be tackled quickly, and they can't wait until they grow up and become prime ministers to do it, do you think collective responsibility overrides individual responsibility in a huge issue like that?
No.
Okay.
I don't. Okay. I think generally people have things that are more within their personal purview that are more difficult to deal with and that they're avoiding, and that generally the way they avoid them is by adopting pseudo-moralistic stances on large-scale social issues so that they look good to their friends and their neighbors. That's what it looks like.
Oh, that's so good. I can't even get over how good that is. Oh, and then her face at the end. What a ridiculous reaction to that. Like, amazing. No, not me. Not me. Jeez. First of all, his answer, the no. Once in my life, I want someone to ask me a question, and I want to have as much confidence and clarity in the truth where I can respond with, no. And that's, nope. Again, it ties in perfectly to our Marx, Foucault, Rousseau conversations. People avoiding dealing with difficult personal issues. And they avoid it by adopting pseudo-moralistic stances on large-scale social issues so that they can look good to their friends and neighbors and the human race. How much of all of this, everything we're seeing today, how much of all of this is simply that? True story. Thanks, Slater. Spread the word.